it's Jessica, and today's topic is going to be on how to brainwash a nation. And you're going to want to stay tuned because at the end of this video, I'll be breaking down the 4 stages of brainwashing a nation and the manipulation tactics that are being used, as well as showing you how this all ties in together and plays a role in what's currently happening to us now. Now, the strategies I'll be talking about on how to brainwash a nation actually came from a former KGB agent, Yuri Bezmenov, in an interview almost 40 years ago. Which is important to know, especially when we compare it to what's currently happening in our country today. And so it basically served as a warning to America, and it was actually a warning about the silent war that's being waged against the United States as part of like a long-term plan to eventually take over America and destroy our system and way of life. Now, before you go off calling it some conspiracy theory, you can actually look up some of Bezmenov's personal life and training to find out how legit of a source he actually is. And let me remind you that this is coming from a former KGB agent who was born to a high-ranking Soviet army officer, and he even took military training where he was taught how to play strategic war games and even how to interrogate prisoners of war. So basically, this is a smart man. This is someone who actually knows from experience what he's talking about. In fact, the 4 stages on how to brainwash a nation were actually used by the Soviet Union. So before I get into it with what the 4 stages are, I want to first read the definition of brainwash. And this is coming directly from the Cambridge Dictionary, which says the definition of brainwash is to make someone believe something by repeatedly telling them that it's true and preventing any other information from reaching them. Now, I want to focus in on the second part of the definition real quick. And once again, this is a Cambridge Dictionary definition, not my own. And it says brainwashing works by preventing any other information from reaching them. Let's think about censorship for a moment. The second we see pastors, teachers, doctors, or politicians speaking up about something and warning the public that things are not actually the way the media is telling you they are, what happens? Well, they're immediately banned or censored, right? Or they get canceled. I mean, I'm even concerned about this video getting censored for simply even stating this. And there's different types of censorships, by the way. So you can get banned, meaning you lose your account entirely, or you can get a particular video banned, or there's also this thing called shadow ban, meaning the YouTube or social media algorithm will not push your video forward anywhere or on search engines, so basically people can't discover you. So really, it's all up to the people watching, your subscribers and followers, to share the video and get the news out there. And by the way, guys, this is why it's always so helpful when people subscribe or follow and share videos, because when you're shadow banned, that's basically all you have to rely on. But anyway, back to censorship. Notice how it's always just one side that gets censored? I'm going to risk it by bringing this point up, but if you remember in the beginning of March 2020, when everyone was watching the news to find out what's going on, but then a group of people, and some pastors, some politicians, some doctors, were starting to notice some things and saying, wait a second, something isn't really adding up. The numbers aren't adding up, and when they started calling out some of those things, they were canceled. So what was happening is you couldn't hear that side. You're only told one thing. You can only listen to and receive your news from one side, one source, and they kept repeating the same things over and over to the public and canceling anyone that stands in their way and calls out their false information and facts, or even personal stories that happen to people that are absolutely sketchy. And so that takes us back to the definition of brainwash. Once again, the Cambridge definition is to make someone believe something by repeatedly telling them that it's true and preventing any other information from reaching them. Sounds pretty familiar. And obviously, I don't even need to expand any further on the fact that it's pretty evident how that's been happening. But this does bring me to a quote by Mark Twain, which is, "It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled." Think about that for a second. Now, there's this term Bezmenov talks about, which is called ideological subversion, which is essentially psychological warfare. And he put it this way: it means to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that, despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions. And it's a great brainwashing technique and process which occurs gradually and slowly in 4 basic stages. Now, have you noticed that since around 2008, there has been this incredible push for socialism in America? And that's because the Marxists that are in positions of power have started to take over all aspects of American society, like our media, our entertainment, what's being taught in public schools, in order to brainwash the masses of people. And they claim that Americanism and capitalism is what causes the world's problems and that somehow socialism is the cure for it. But unfortunately, world history has proven time and time again that the opposite is true. And they're trying to convince people to want these changes and to want America to welcome socialism, which basically made people suffer and become oppressed by brutal dictators. I mean, just take a look at North Korea as an example. And what they're doing is trying to brainwash the public to accept this form of Marxism in a slow process called ideological subversions, which is absolutely intentional. It's being done on purpose. And they want to overthrow the federal government and basically bring the country into a state of crisis and cause division from things like a race war so they can usher in their own agenda. And guys, once again, these 4 stages of brainwashing a nation and these strategies sound an awful lot like what's happening today. But mind you, this was said almost 40 years ago. So without further ado, here are the 4 stages to brainwash a nation. So the first stage is demoralization. Now it takes between 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why does it take that many years? Because that is how long it takes to educate a generation of students and expose them to the ideology you want them to accept. And the thing is, because it happens gradually, it's less likely to be challenged. It's a slow process, and that's how you get people to conform to something. And once you demoralize the first generation, it just makes it that much easier to demoralize the following. And the demoralization process in the US has been completed for a long while now. And in fact, in the interview with Bezmenov, he actually stated that this process was over completed even. And this was in the 80s, meaning they already demoralized the first generation, the second generation, and now they're just in complete control. And what's really crazy is that most of this process was actually done by Americans to Americans, thanks to the lack of moral standards. The amount of moral decay from our entertainment alone is just absolutely unbelievable. It combats any critical thinking, and it essentially dumbs you down. You know, it's the constant exposure to violence, riots, immoral behavior, glorifying sex, and showing your body for some extra money. I mean, all it does, it constantly feeds people all these immoral things, and at the same time, it sells it to you in a way that it's just socially normal and acceptable. It's the information monopoly, like how the mass media is just bought up and leads people to having a perspective bias and reporting whatever view the owner wants at the time. The ultimate goal being to degrade people's critical thinking to the point where they can no longer reason, people can no longer think for themselves, and they just simply accept whatever the media, entertainment sources, and Hollywood puppets are feeding them. That is how generations become demoralized. Now, why is demoralization so important in the process to brainwashing a nation? Well, because then when you have exposure to real, true, and accurate information, it won't matter anymore. A person that has been demoralized is not able to assess or evaluate true information. So in other words, the facts mean nothing to them. You can literally shower the person with real information. You can present them with authentic proof, documentation, pictures, evidence. And as Bezmenov said, even if you were to take a demoralized person by force to the Soviet Union to a concentration camp, that person will still refuse to believe it until he eventually gets a rude awakening. But until then, no amount of evidence can help awaken someone that has been demoralized. And I mean, this generation has such a consume, don't question it mentality. It's honestly quite frightening. And it's a sobering thought. You're showing people facts, evidence, and they don't believe it. In fact, they'll just call you a conspiracy theorist because, once again, that's what demoralized general mass of people label those that are trying to present real facts and proof. And the Bible actually describes this moral state in Isaiah 5:20. And it reads, "What sorrow for those who say that evil is good and good is evil, that dark is light and light is dark, or that bitter is sweet and sweet is bitter." And really, if you think about it, take a look at the world around you, and that's what's going on right now. This isn't only talking about just the media and entertainment, by the way. It's happening to our churches too. I mean, churches are now trying to conform to teach what people's itching ears want to hear, just like it talks about in 2 Timothy 4:3. They're staying away from controversial topics or preaching parts of the gospel that might offend people. And instead of taking a stand against certain serious things that are happening, or at least speaking up about them so people wake up, most churches decide to remain silent so they don't lose members of the congregation. And when the truth isn't being preached, it becomes very easy to demoralize the people. So now we have so-called Christians, people who profess to be believers, that are completely demoralized and they can't even think straight. And now they're talking down to those Christians that are actually preaching the real word and the real truth of the Bible. And it's a fact that the line between good and evil is bold, but God warns humanity of our tendency to confuse the two when we're so deep in our sin or a part of this world that we begin to essentially call evil good and good evil. And guys, we need to stand firmly on the narrow path, even if we're only one of a few. Okay, so let's move on to the second stage of the brainwashing process of a nation, which is destabilization. And now, the primary ways to destabilize a nation is through the economy, foreign relations, and its defense systems. The goal being, when you eliminate the free market system, which is basically a system of buying and selling goods and services with no governmental influence, so not under the control of the government, and you replace that with a government that's promising to fulfill all of these things, but the reality being they have no intention of delivering any of the things that they're promising. And the intention behind this is, of course, to ruin America with this Marxist thought. But of course, the only way to do it and to get there is to brainwash the people. Now, this brings us to number 3. And the third stage is a crisis. Sound familiar yet? Once again, mind you, this interview was made almost 40 years ago. Just keep that in mind. But the third stage to brainwashing a nation is a crisis. Now, when you bring a nation to the verge of a crisis, it can completely collapse a nation just within 6 weeks. And I mean, we've had several major of those happen, from 9/11 to the huge one now, like the situation that happened in Afghanistan. And of course, the global crisis and all the medical stuff they're pushing and trying to mandate, which I can probably get banned for talking about. And then there's the emphasis on this race division they want you to focus on. So now you have people fighting against each other. And once again, it only takes 6 weeks. Now, this is where there's this huge change in the power structure and economy. And this is where we currently are. So at this point, what happens next? Well, people just want normalization. They just want to go back to normal. Which brings us to the fourth and final stage, which is normalization. Yuri Bezmenov said this about the normalization stage. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in 1968, they said, now the situation in Czechoslovakia is normalized. So in other words, what you do is completely demoralize, destabilize, destroy a nation with crisis after crisis to the point where the people are just saying, we just want to go back to normal. We just want normal. And then, just like in the case with the Soviets and Czechoslovakia, they roll in and say, now we've normalized everything with our tanks. It's all part of the brainwashing process. Now, just think about our current situation. People are being fed up with all the mandates and closures and short reopenings only to have more closures. And what are people saying? We just want to go back to normal. We just want normal. And what are the elite telling us or preparing us for? The new normal. And if those people weren't so immoral and corrupt and actually had the good intentions they want you to believe they have, well, then they would be reiterating us going back to normal. But instead, they're only pushing the idea of this new normal because they're using a crisis to push forward an agenda. Like the pandemic is like a golden ticket, and they're playing it hard in order to slowly desensitize people to their actions and gradually have people accept a new normal, which is part of their plans for a new world order. Now, once again, before you tune out by simply hearing that term, New World Order, think about what it actually means, and then open your eyes to see what's being done. And like Bezmenov mentioned, this is all part of a brainwashing process. And another great point he brings up is this. The majority of the people and leaders that support this ideology and say it's good, especially the leaders of it currently, they think they're going to be the ones to get all these high political positions of power, which is why they're doing it. But in reality, they're actually not. In fact, they're going to be the first people that will be taken out and shot. Here's why. When those people realize that they are not going to be the ones in charge and they essentially just lost everything, that's when they become the biggest and most vocal resistors of the movement. And history proves this has always been the case. This is why those people immediately get eliminated, because then their voices get too loud. So these churches that are in support of the movement and these so-called influencers and leaders of it, they're going to come for them first. And guys, if you still think this can't happen, I'm making this video right now expecting to probably get banned or censored, as it happens to pretty much everyone else that talks about these topics. But flash back to just a few years ago when we actually had the freedom of speech and the freedom to speak our mind and our views without the fear of getting permanently removed from doing so. That's pretty much entirely gone now, and it's only continuing to get worse. So if you think this can't happen to us, then with all due respect, it's definitely time to wake up. Guys, the Bible prophesied these things beginning to happen over 2,000 years ago. We're literally living in those days now. The only hope we have is not found in our government. It's not found in our political leaders. The only hope we have is in God. It's in Jesus. And now is a time to see God. Not tomorrow, not later, now. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to share this with others and get the news, get the message out there. And also please subscribe for more content so you can stay up to date. And until next time, bye!